All right, John, welcome to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. So excited to have you, man. I'm so excited for you to share your story about your journey in life, most notably your book that you just released, but you have an amazing podcast as well, and just a tremendous story. I would label it both discovery but resilience. Is that something that is probably truthful? Is that well described?
Yeah, I think that's very well described. I think my next book, Tyler, is going to be on resilience.
Okay. Why is that?
Yeah. What I'm finding is, especially the feedback from the book, is people have just heard my journey of just these highs and lows, and then repeat the process, higher highs, lower lows, with health and career changes and accidents and a business failure early on. Like I just had a call from somebody and she was reading the book and she goes, how did you keep moving forward? Because right now with what's going on in my life, I feel absolutely paralyzed and numb. And I read your book and I realized you never got to that place. And we just had this amazing 15-minute conversation, and I shared a few things with her that it just helped her, just kind of released her to just take this next small step forward. So I think it's important. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and I really think there's hangover is not the right word, but everything that we've been through in the last year has made has left their thumbprint on our hearts, our minds, in a way that I think a lot of us are still trying to, even though it looks like the sun's coming out, to a lot of us it doesn't feel like it is.
Well, I mean, it's said, it's coldest when, the dawn, is on. It's coldest part of the day. And, I view that some of us kind of the greatest opportunity for leaders is right now before us. As all of a sudden, What do we do from this step forward? So let's step back. We'll get into a little bit of your story. There's some great elements of that story. But I want to ask this question. You're a guy from the Midwest as well. You end up at school in New York, like myself. I'm from Ohio, went to New York. You're from Minnesota, went to New York. But where did that resilience, as you just mentioned, the ability to continue just moving forward, never just like laying down, where do you think that came from?
That's a great question. I was just never willing to give up. I always saw, what? I think from when I was younger, I just always had this sense that I was meant to do something that had meaning, right? The way I think about it now is my words today would be, I want to live a life so the use of my life outlives my life. And I think I had this sense when I was even younger that I was meant for something that had impact, right? Like you talk about. And when you are in that, so I guess in all of these, valley periods, business and otherwise, right? I'm like, well, here's the thing. What choice do we have? I mean, I could just stop and roll over and curl up in the fetal position. And there's times I probably did that for a period of time. But you know what? I just had to keep, I think here was the key. I've always focused on what that next small step was, especially when there was so much ambiguity, so much uncertainty, so many like weighty consequences to maybe decisions I was making. But I had to keep moving forward. I think part of it might have been my training as a fighter pilot. Because if you think about it, right, when you're in a dogfight, it is like playing three-dimensional chess at 400 miles an hour. And anytime that aircraft, you or your opponent moves, it's like the chessboard gets reshuffled. You have to learn in that situation, in combat, you make a wrong decision, it could cost you or your wingman their life. But you still have to make a decision. You have to act. You have to observe, and then figure out, what decision then do I have to make next? And I think just this framework of just constantly looking for that next small decision, that next small step I have to take, and then just just repeat that process until it feels like we're starting to walk back uphill again.
Yeah, I mean, I love, that story of being a fighter pilot, going through that, and one of your, I guess, great resilient points of life is when you took a ball to the face, and that ended your flying career. Go back into that situation to say, from this leadership point of view, from this, okay, now this chess game has completely changed. What's my next step? And kind of as you've revisited that in writing your book about purpose, go back to that point and how you what was that next step? What was that next thing you're saying, okay, I have to move forward? Kind of try to revisit that framework if you can for us.
Yeah, so imagine this, right? You get a call from your commanding officer to come down to a stateroom, it's kind of like getting called to the principal's office. So this is like usually never a good thing. And I get sat down, and then I am told that I've been selected to go to Top Gun. So, dude, like I float out of my commanding officer's office. Like I am fired up beyond belief. And that weekend, the ball you were talking about, I was playing softball, and I got hit with a line drive in the eye. By the way, that was 25 years ago. I was talking to somebody who's in flight school right now. Playing softball as a Navy pilot is a prohibited activity, and they actually told the story about this guy because I had nerve damage to my eye, and I was done. I never got my medical back. I went to Top Gun, never got to fly there. I actually instructed until I got processed out of the Navy. Now, at the time, my entire identity, everything about who I was as a Navy officer, as an F-14 pilot, and all of that had been stripped away. That next 2 years was really hard because, I'd been in the Navy 7 years, so I was a pilot that couldn't fly. I had an engineering degree I'd never used. The only job offer I got, traditional job offer, was to be a test engineer in the basement of a big company. Like, no thanks. And the only jobs I could find are sales jobs. And here's the thing, though. I was so used to a culture of excellence, right? Tyler, if you and I were in the squadron, we are constantly, because our lives depend on what we do, challenging each other to be better. We live with integrity. We are all in. Even if you and I weren't best friends and we wouldn't want to go hang out and have a beer, right? Which is some people in the squadron like that. You still have their back and they have your back. I got out into business, and I think in my first year, I think I had 7 or 8 jobs. I would quit like that when I saw people that didn't have integrity, changed things, went back on their word. I'm just like, I quit. They're like, well, you can't quit. You quit. You're walking away from this huge commission. I'm like, I quit. And I got to tell you, man, it was because my identity, who I thought I was, had been stripped away. My vision of my life, my purpose, my mission was all about being a lifelong career naval officer. And I had to rebuild everything from the ground up. Now, in this period of time, I got to tell you, I was and this is the gift we can give to other people, especially in our leadership role. But I was in a Barnes & Noble I was in the business section. I was looking at all these books that look like foreign titles to me. I remember I picked a book called The Fifth Discipline because there was something in the subtitle that appealed to me, and I started reading the book, and I'm like, this book is horrible. It's like, is this what business books are all about? Like, it was terrible. But in that, though, I met a guy. He was there picking up, I can't remember what book he was buying, we started chatting. And he goes, well, let's go grab coffee. And he sat down and started mentoring me. And he was the president or of a whole school district or whatever the title is. And then he introduced me to his mentor. He had a mentor who was one of the top attorneys in San Diego. These guys started spending time with me like, John, what are you good at? What do you want to do next? What gets you excited? And they helped me refine who I was, what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted my marriage to look like, what I wanted to do in business. And that gave me the focus to then move back to Minnesota and start my first company. Had they not reached out, like, Tyler, this is, 26 years ago. I'm in touch with all 3 of those folks. And I credit today my faith, my success, the fact that I'm still married 31 years to my wife, to somebody going out of their way to sow into me. And think about right now, you talked about at the beginning, with everything that's happened in the world, we have the opportunity in a leadership role, even if you're a peer or you're new in an organization, we still have that ability to have this positive influence in other people. But I believe everybody listening right now, what if you were just that person like I think of with this guy, Jeff Saavedra, 26 years later? What if you were just that kind of person in the life of just one other person?
So I as I mentioned to you when we get started, I got to adjust to get a little bit more comfortable because now we're getting into this. And I love how, we're taking this conversation, your experience, and how that caveat of mentorship changed your life. And to me, as I look at evolving leadership and my idea of, what healthy leadership is that blend of empathy and that desire to help others accomplish more, which is really emphasized in mentorship. And I heard a story in preparation for this. To me, this is just my thought, and I'm going to share it, and I want you to correct it. I heard a story about when you went into the Navy and you went into flight school, and as you're preparing and as you were getting there, you were kind of challenged to say, hey, find out who the best guy is and go find out what he's doing. And as I heard that story, in my mind, what I heard is you were conditioned right then and there to go seek mentorship. Do you feel like that was the case, whether you realize it or not? Because to me, if we are conditioning ourselves and others to seek mentorship, then it's no longer about competition. It is, hey, how can I stand on your shoulders?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is, think about this. This is 1988 that I'm heading down to flight school. Top Gun had come out in 1986. So anybody that had an inkling toward being a Navy fighter pilot was applying.
Well, just see, as anyone that was single, male, they wanted to go run on the beach, they wanted to be a Top Gun pilot. Let's be honest, right? Okay.
That's right. They wanted to play volleyball with their shirt off, except for Goose, right? He didn't have the body for the...
Yeah.
He had to wear the shirt, But think about it, like we were told, right now there's so much interest. 1 in every 10,000 people that apply across all the different ways the Navy has to bring pilots in is going to end up flying a fighter. I'm like, what did I just do? Like, what did I just sign up for myself for? And I was like kind of stressing out before heading down to Pensacola to start flight training. My dad pulled me aside. And honestly, Tyler, this is some of the best advice I've ever had in my life. He said, listen, there's going to be somebody down there, the ace of the base. He's going to be tearing it up. He's going to be a student. He's going to be ahead of you in the classes, because my dad understood how the Navy worked. So he is not competing with you. So he said, go buy him a beer and ask him what he's doing and see if he'll share with you. And that guy's name was John Foster. And he was doing stuff different than everybody else, how he was working, the extra work that he was doing, how he was preparing. And he shared with me, and here's kind of the framework that I pulled out of that, is go figure out what you want to do in life. Right? What is that goal? For me at the time, it was to graduate number 1, because I knew if I graduated number 1, I could actually choose what I got to fly. Only one person gets that. If you're number 2 in your class, you could get cargo planes, because there's something called quality spread. They need good pilots in all the communities. Okay? And so first of all, go figure out what they did. And then, what is the plan? And then ask yourself a question. Are you willing to do what they did to get those results? And then if the answer is yes, and you're going to ask for mentorship, then you need to be all in and committed to taking those steps, successes or failures, and keep moving forward regardless. And you know what? So you have to count the cost before you start. And you know what? As I've gotten into business and built companies, from startups to companies that were absorbed by big Fortune 100 companies, that has been my approach and mindset all the way through.
Find that person just ahead of you and just ask them, say, hey, how are you doing this? What are you doing? And then glean from that things that you can apply in whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Well, yeah, like here's an example. I'll never forget this because my friends thought I was nuts, but I got introduced to he was a customer of mine at a retail company I had, a billionaire. And he wanted to mentor me, and he wanted to bring me onto his team. Like, he saw something in me at the time I wasn't seeing in myself. And I got to know him. And guess what? He was on his third wife that was not going well. He did not have a relationship with his kids. And I applied that same thing. I said, you know what? If I learn from him, I am going to get what he has. I could be wealthy and alone. So is this somebody that I want to let into my world and allow to mentor me? And I passed on that. And he was not happy. And my friends were absolutely dumbfounded. They're like, well, no, just don't do some of the stuff that he's doing. I'm like, no, dude, to get that level of success, he's made choices that I'm going to learn how to think how he thinks. That's not how I want to think. That's not what's important to me. And I passed on that. And so I think when you're looking for mentorship, you have to look at all the results. I call it being a fruit inspector, right? You got to look at the whole tree and say, you know what, is this what I want to replicate in my life? But when you find somebody that has in their, let's say, business excellence, right? They're making a difference in the world in a cause. They have a great marriage. Their kids love them. Whatever those things that are important to you, man, now you count the cost. And then that is a great way to find a mentor. And when somebody does agree to mentor you, I think we have a responsibility to actually communicate, take action on what they suggest. Like if I come back to a mentor a few times with the same question over and over and over, like today when I mentor other people, that I'm thinking this is not going to probably work out long term.
Well, I mean, it shows how invested they are. But I want to go back because I think in your book, On Purpose with Purpose, you identify, 3 key points. It is, identity, values, and destination. And, what I want to focus on from what you just said is how important it is for not only yourself to identify values, but also to see the values in others. What values do they profess, and say, is there alignment? Now, I could sit here and I believe, and as I'm framing this up, John, I could go through, hey, these are my 5 values. And you could say, okay, Tyler, I have 2 of those top 5, but, I have 3 different ones. And I can say, oh, okay, I get that, John. Those 3 are in my next 5. They're maybe not as high, but I appreciate that. And we just have a little different alignment, but it's not polar opposites. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, that importance as one being a leader, to have those identified and say, this is how I carry myself. So when others see me, they know that of me. But then 2, be able to recognize in others, hey, there's either congruence or incongruence. And I think you bring up such a great point as a leader. It's, be that leader that you want others to follow too. And if you're saying, hey, do as I say, don't do as I do, that doesn't work in parenting and it doesn't work in business. So I love how you bring that up in values. And I'd love for you to dig a little bit deeper as you talk about it in your book, but in this, context of why is that in your mind so important?
Values are at the core. Think about it. When we really understand our core values, not the ones that we think we should have, right? I'll just tell people right now, here's how you might know that you are not in alignment, like Tyler said. When you have to make a decision and it's really difficult, or you feel stress, or you feel anxiety, or maybe in certain situations they are stressful to you and they're not comfortable, I'd be willing to guess that there is something that's out of alignment in that situation with who you really are. I really think these core values are wired into us. And when I get into coaching, Tyler, just as an example, when I'm working with a leader and we identify these core values and we're looking at are things in my life in alignment. Now, right before my accident, as an example, I was living under the tyranny of they. what they thought my values should be in certain situations, how they define success, all these things. And I describe that place as smoldering discontent. Now, one of my top values is family, my marriage, my kids. Now, I'm working 60 to 70 hours a week. I'm traveling 3 to 5 days a week, and I justified everything because I'm laying the foundation. Sometimes I think it's okay to be intentionally out of balance. I was just out of balance. And no wonder things were so stressful at that time, because I wasn't aware that, hey, this is a core value, and I was not structuring what I was doing in the world in alignment with really what's important to me, right? Integrity. I'm all about integrity, but sometimes in sales and these situations, like, you just had to push the boundaries to make your bonus, right? I never felt like I ever did anything unethical, but man, there was people around. I quit a job because one of my coworkers was constantly pushing the boundary, and I didn't want to be associated with it, and I had spoken up about it. But all these things cause the stress, but also our identity. You talked earlier about, competing, and I think I think that is absolutely key. What we need to do as leaders is learn to compete with the best version of who we are, and not compare ourselves to others. Because when we don't know our core values, it's going to be really easy for me to maybe compare myself to a coworker or to another CEO or to another entrepreneur. A friend of mine is a sports performance coach. He works with some of the top athletes in the NBA and the MLB. He said the number one killer of performance is comparing yourself to others. Number one. And the only way that I can compete with the best version of myself is to actually, this is how I frame it up, but right, who is the person in the mirror? And then who is that person that God created me to be? What does he see when he looks at me? And what I realized, that gap was enormous. So looking at my values, my passions, my talents, my skills, I went into this deep dive of understanding who the best version of John was. And what I could start to do, small little things to start closing that gap. And here's what happened. In doing that, all of that anxiety and that stress and that angst just melted away. What I should do next, that purpose, that mission for me was crystal clear. And I'd always tried to do it backwards first, if that makes sense. Right? I got to go figure out my purpose and my calling and my mission. Then I can become that person that can succeed in that work. And I honestly always felt like it was like this buried treasure, like I wasn't worthy of figuring it out. So as a guy, like, it was my motto, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm going to outwork everybody. Which that led to some serious problems, because that is how I showed up. I got great results, but I was miserable. And when I flipped the script and said, okay, who am I? Then figure out what am I meant to do? It's like the path just, the fog lifted on getting clarity on where to move.
So you mentioned a piece there as we reflected back to that competition. And, one of the things that you've talked about and is so important is finding that wingman. You had a wingman when you were flying, and finding that wingman that you work with, or, accountability partner, or those that, are maybe, kind of running parallel as an accountability, whatever. Could you go through, in your opinion, both flying, fighter jets in the Navy, what worked and what doesn't work? But then when we talk about this in our professional lives, what works and what doesn't work as being the best leader that we can be in reflection of that, having that wingman?
Well, a wingman is different than a mentor. Mm-hmm. Okay, now think about this. Let's just say that you and I have just done a lot of work together. A wingman is somebody that you really trust enough to really share some of your goals. So as an example, I got some feedback from my mentor that, John, you show up in certain situations as somebody who is very arrogant. You can be really sarcastic. You have certain people, mostly athletic guys, because that's kind of my background, that you totally gel with, and the other parts of your team feel excluded. You got to fix that stuff if you ever want to get a promotion. This was very hard for me to hear. all right? Because this was out of sync with how I saw myself. It wasn't nice, but honestly, it was one of the kindest things that somebody could say to me. So there's a difference. Now, that's my mentor. But when I realized I got to make some changes, I got some anger issues from some things when I was younger. And I had a couple really close friends that I went to and I said, buddy, I'm going to be working on this stuff. Can I share that with you? Can I give you permission to check in and say, hey, how did work go today when we get together and maybe have a drink or get together for, lunch? And I, over time, realized I didn't have any of those relationships for me with other guys that where I could really share some of those things that I wanted to be working on. Because I know, let's say that you and I, okay, Tyler, I'm working on my anger issues, right? And I know I come across this way with people, and I need to get better. And man, and hey, what are you working on? What can I help? Like we're talking about having real conversations with, people that are really peers. And unfortunately, because I ask people this, how many men, when I do workshops and stuff, and we do an anonymous poll, how many people do you have in your life that you think could be actually you trust enough to be in that role? Most people answer between 0 and 2. Think about that. And here's the thing is, since I didn't have people like that, I had to actually go out and intentionally build those relationships to really have somebody that was a wingman, because in the military, you share everything. And when we debriefed from a flight, if I messed up, it was debriefed in front of the entire squadron in the debrief area where we'd all sit, and everybody got to hear the conversation. I mean, there was no hiding because our lives depended on it. And I always knew, though, everybody there was sharing this because they wanted me to be the best that I can be, and they wanted my feedback, my input, so that they can improve. And so that's really where the concept Wingman came in, and something I've intentionally had to work at for the last 25 years is to develop those kind of relationships.
So as part of my journey in growth, I believe that point that you just made is probably one of the most pivotal adjustments that leaders can make. For me, it was very much being alone on an island. I'm an Enneagram 8. I have, strengths that are, dominant. I can be intense. I'm, learning more and more every day how to use those. And a big part of that, as you mentioned, that pushes people away. Well, my intention is never to push people away. It's really to bring people in. So I've had to really grow through that. And as a part of that, my transformation has been by sitting at that table with others. It is to open it up and have those discussions and say, hey, help me here. And I think, that's why I feel called to do what I'm doing now is creating those tables to say, hey, let's get around and talk to each other. Let's create this community where we can, especially generationally, as I see this, major opportunity in this generation of, bridging the gap between these different leadership environments. And so as you bring that up, and as I sit here, and I hope the audience listening can grasp that, is to me that growth and having those to sit at your table that you can share and that share back at you is one of the most pivotal decisions you'll make in leadership development and growth, because I think that's what comes back and starts to fix what's broken in leadership today. And I know you've mentioned that and you've spoke about that, and I'd love to kind of jump off there. Is we have this leadership deficit today, whether some people realize it or not. And I know you have identified that.
I think everybody realizes it.
Well, and hey, the first key in fixing any problem is realizing there's a problem. If there's no problem, then you don't know that you need to fix it. Now, the real job becomes fixing that. And I think that's where, too often is when there's too many solutions to the problem, really nothing gets done and saying, hey, what's most effective? So I'd love to hear from you kind of, taking that, we're going from mentorship and values and those sitting around you with your wingman and saying, how does that all then tie into, based upon your purpose and all these things to me gelling together, really coming and saying, hey, how do we fix this problem that's before us? Or how do we even create such a culture where we're not having to fix it because it's broken, where it was just done right? So what, in your mind and in your heart, as you believe that you've gone through the lessons that you've gone through, what does that show you going forward? What is that vision that you see? I know that was a lot. I see you taking notes. I appreciate that. That was a lot packed into a 30-second ramble. But I really want to hear how all that ties together for you.
I agree with you, Tyler, that the leadership industry has let us down. We spend, if you actually, the research I did for my book blew me away. In America, this is just in the U.S., the last decade, we've averaged $24 billion a year in leadership training. You look at the data from Gallup, engagement and employee satisfaction, everything has not even ticked anywhere. As a matter of fact, it's gone down a little bit. And here's where I think the leadership industry does us a disservice. They focus on the why, the what, and the how. Those are very important. Underneath that, it's foundational. It is who you are. We talked about mentorship. I could sit here and tuck in under Tyler as his, and say, dude, will you be my wingman and my mentor? Can we, I want to build a business. I want to hit these goals. You could give me your best stuff, and I might not get the results of other people you're mentoring. And guess what? Because I'm running it through a flawed person. My preconceptions, my limiting beliefs. I'm not in touch with my core values. And I'm telling you, folks, you start there. And if you ever wonder why, and here's part of this. This was hard for me because I've been very frustrated at times. I had to take 100% in total personal responsibility for the outcomes I had in my life, the relationships that I had, how I thought, my beliefs and my actions. And I said, okay, I got to own this. I don't like my team. And then guess what? It was really easy to say, well, it's because of the boss or it's because of this guy or this person. I'm like, no, John, what have you done to create that dynamic that you know that you don't like? It's easy to say, well, it's not me. But when I looked in the mirror and I said, okay, who do I need to be to just influence this dynamic? And here I want to just tell people the power of one. You want to change the leadership crisis? Work on yourself. Become a better version of yourself. I'm not saying the best, but just take a step toward it. And then when you do that, just how you interact with people, you will see your influence in the lives of other people be absolutely amplified. When people see you start to make some positive changes, how you show up, the words you have, your attitudes, your beliefs toward certain things. It could be change. It doesn't matter, right? It could be remote working, or they want me to come back into an office right now. What you might be the guy that's constantly complaining about the boss and how they rolled something out. Guess what? You're part of the problem. I had to realize I was part of the problem. When we do that, we can help other people. And just think about this. What if you as a single person over the next 2 years were able to work on yourself and have a positive impact on 100 people where they go, wow, Tyler is, you know what, I'm going to make some changes because there's something special about that guy. And those 100 people then have a sphere of influence. What if they touched 100 people? Now you have 10,000 people that over, let's say, 2 or 3 years have the potential to be impacted because you started making changes right at your own desk. And what if now those 10,000 people are inspired because they're also seeing some other positive in the change to touch another 100 people? That's 1 million people. So we started this, Tyler, 2 years ago called Project 100. My thing was, could I as an individual have an impact on 1 million people? And we've been measuring it, and we're actually well over 2 million people 3 years into it. So I want to give people hope that you have all the authority and all the influence you need to actually change. But what it takes is just start with yourself and what you do have control over. And that is your relationships at work and at home or at church or down where you volunteer, wherever they are right now, that's where you start. And in that, you start small, and in small beginnings, epic things can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been very much an experience that I've been able to walk through. That's been an experience that mentors have shared with me as well. And And I love that. And, you know, it starts with that identity. It starts with, you know, finding those values and then matching that up with the mentors, with the wingmen. But, you know, one of the pieces that I think you mentioned in your book, and I loved when I saw this, and I think this ties into it. You got to ask the most important question. You got to ask the most important question of yourself to say, how can I show up and lead today? And what is it going to take to be that? And so I think when you ask that, then you start to identify, oh, what's my true identity? What are my real values? Who are, you know, who's with me? Where are we going? Are we going the same path? Or like, I got that all wrong, as opposed to, as you mentioned earlier, working for they. Just trying to, hey, whatever the other people, oh, you know, XYZ, you know, popular person on social media, XY, you know, whatever it may be, they think you should have this or that. So I'm going to chase after that. It's like, but does that matter to you? Does that fit your values? Does that, do the people that follow them, is that the people you want to lead? And if not, then you probably shouldn't follow them, as you know, so astutely, you know, identified and mentioned earlier. And just, again, I love how all of this fits together, because it is very systemic, but yet it's not easy.
No, it's not easy, but, you know, and you know, this is a great place to start for folks, right? So here's a very important question I think people could easily ask themselves is right? Because this kind of starts into the realm of that personal responsibility, is just look at your world and your life and some of your goals, maybe with your company or with your team or individually. And what is the one thing, the one small thing that right now, that if you worked in that area and made a small improvement, would increase your influence and your impact as a leader in an area that's important to you right now? Like, if you actually wrote that down, took some time and said, okay, here is one thing. This is a place that I'm going to start. Maybe you come up with a whole list. Well, guess what? Just pick one, or which one bubbles to the top and says, you know, if I got a little bit better here, it might make the other ones easier. Second step, step 2, is say, what is something you could do literally in the next 24 hours that is an action step that you could then go, you know what? This isn't a giant win, but I did better. I was a little gooder. And you can go to your buddy who's a wingman and say, dude, can I just celebrate something with you? Like, this might not seem like a big deal, because as we start to work on this and we understand what those priorities are, I'm kind of a born people pleaser, you know, especially with how hard I've worked. Here's something I've had to realize is whenever I said yes, I was saying no to something else. And I had to learn to say yes to things that were going to move me forward and what I wanted to accomplish. As a business leader, as a husband, as a father, and not, like you mentioned again, like all those others' expectations. And going through a process like this, having a framework on actually looking at your to-do list and your calendar and going, no, that doesn't belong there. Right? No, that shouldn't be the top of the list. Man, I got to tell you, man, that was liberating when I started saying no to some things.
Yeah, that's a massive lesson for leaders. And this is what I'd have to say, as I have learned that it is something that I have to keep coming back to. Because all of a sudden, even when you identify your purposes, is I've been lucky enough, I think in the last month or two, to finally figure that out after a couple years of searching, is there are things that fit that, but yet maybe not right now. And it's being willing to say, no to great ideas in order that you can say yes to amazing ideas. And it's I'm learning that again right now. And it's, things that I'm doing that are exciting, that are really purposeful and serving, yet it's like, hey, you got to say no to great ideas so you have the time to make sure that amazing ideas actually, end up amazing. And so I, appreciate you bringing that up, as that's a lesson that I think a lot of leaders need to, go through and learn if they haven't. So as we wrap up, we haven't got into, probably the second biggest life-changing event. And I want to touch on that real quick from a standpoint of, as we talked earlier about getting hit in the ball, hit in the face with a ball, and I'd have to say, this tendency of head injuries kind of showed up. And, if it were me, I'd say, hey, you were that hard-headed where God had to, break open your brain in order to get to you. I'm not saying that about you. I'd say that about me.
Well, I think it's true, though.
Well,
I'm okay with that.
Is one of the things that I noted, and this was my own personal experience, and I want to bring this because I sense this. There's a certain amount of, at our lowest confidence, is when we really find our greatest purpose, because it's no longer on what we can do. It is, we have to turn our hands up and say, I got to let go of this, and God direct me. And as a person of faith and having gone through that journey, you want to walk through a little bit, that experience, but then also, maybe layer in that idea of, here I am, I'm on top of the world, I'm doing great things, I think I have all this figured out, and bam, my life gets reset. And now all of a sudden I have to figure out, where do I go differently?
Yeah. So 9 years ago, I was at a retreat for a nonprofit that I was doing some work with, and I'm on a horse, and we were going to go horseback riding to go have lunch. All of a sudden my horse just bolts and takes off and accelerates to a flat-out gallop, and we're heading straight at a steel corral fence. And I couldn't get him to turn. I couldn't get him to slow down. And we're getting closer, and he's going faster. And I remember right in front of the fence thinking to myself, I was absolutely in terror. Like, I've been in combat and shot at. Like, nothing eclipsed this. I'm thinking, this is not going to end well. And that's the last thing I remember. So this horse goes straight into a fence. I don't know what the horse was thinking. He bucked so hard, he flipped over and landed on the ground on his side and slammed into the fence drum first. When he did that, he launched me Superman head first into a 3-inch rolled steel beam. I completely crushed the entire left side of my skull. I broke every bone in my skull except my jaw and my right cheekbone. I broke my neck in multiple places. I shattered my shoulder, and then the next bar down crushed my rib cage. One of the broken ribs punctured my lung. We found out later, Tyler, from multiple doctors, what happened to me is medically not survivable. I mean, first of all, there was just so much brain damage. I won't describe it all. It's bad. But I woke up on the ground into more pain than I could ever describe to anybody. And I'm screaming and yelling and writhing and trying to get away from this pain. And people were holding me down, thank goodness, or I probably would have severed my spinal cord. And all of a sudden, one of the guys said, John, I just watched you relax so completely. It looked like you were sinking into the ground. He thought he had just watched me die. But it was in that moment I was in God's presence. And what I felt was the most intense, unconditional love that's almost beyond words. Because I remember laying there with my body crushed. The first thought I had that crossed my mind is, I'm not worthy of somebody loving me like this. And as this washed over me, all the pain and panic and fear was completely gone. And then God spoke to me as I'm laying there. It was a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And he said, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. You know, any of the Bible readers out there will recognize that from Romans. I had no clue where that came from at the time, just being real. And then he told me he was going to heal me and use it for his glory. And then I woke up and I told everybody basically God, he left. He was standing next to me. It's pretty crazy. There's so much we could unpack in that. But I'll never forget. Let me just share this with you, though, because it was... I was in ICU for 5 weeks, and then I was at a hospital here in Denver for 20 months with a severe traumatic brain injury, 23 surgeries. They had to remove my skull twice, 2 craniotomies, and facial reconstruction and implants, and I mean, you name it. No spinal cord damage, which the doctors absolutely couldn't fathom. So here's one memory, though, that really put things in focus, though. This is a few days after the accident. The doctor comes in. This is before the first craniotomy. He's a neurosurgeon. And I had post-traumatic amnesia because the head injury was so bad. Those 5 weeks, I literally have 3 memories. This is one of them. And Dr. Van Gilder in red stitching, neurosurgeon, comes in, starts talking to my wife about this craniotomy. And what I'm hearing is the chances of a really good outcome are not good. And the chances of me being the person she remembered after that surgery are not promising. And then he looks at my wife and says, does John have a will, and does he have a living will? And we had actually just redone our whole estate plan, Tyler, and we were actually supposed to sign it after I got back from this trip. I was up in Montana. Our family lives in Denver. My wife had come up from Denver. And I hear her explain this to him. And he goes, well, do this. Call the attorney right now. I want it FedExed up here or faxed up here so John can sign it before we do surgery. I think it's going to be important. And they leave, right? She goes to call the attorney. The doctor goes to do what doctors do. And I'm laying there in bed. Even though I just had this experience in God's presence, I was convinced of one thing, that next weekend was my funeral. So I started playing the tape. Right? And at first it felt pretty good because guess what? You start envisioning all the people at the front of the church saying all these nice things, but that's what you do at a funeral, right? You don't invite the guy to speak who's going to be, tell it like it really is. You know what I'm saying? And then I started thinking, hey, what would the conversations be in the back of the church when everybody's rooting around for the fried chicken and potato salad? And what would some of these close friends of mine, fraternity brothers, business partners, say 1 and 2 and 3 years down the road? Would I be like some of those people that have been in my life that were just had a transformational impact? Or would I be just like, yeah, he was a good guy, worked hard, what a bummer. What was his wife's name again? And I got to tell you, dude, I was so convicted laying there. And I started thinking of 2 concepts. A, inheritance, right? The first thing I thought of is Donna and the kids going to be okay, money, insurance, and all this stuff. And I went through that whole process, and I started thinking about legacy. Had I lived a life so the use of my life would outlive my life? And what I started thinking of a legacy is what I leave in other people, not to other people. And I'm like, what have I left in my wife, in my kids, in this world that'd be meaningful? Especially from a what I call a kingdom perspective, or with what God's doing in the world. And I think he's all over the stuff going on in business. But that's when I realized that if I do get this second chance, which I was given, I had complete power and authority to rewrite my script. And one of the things that I did as I recovered is I wrote that obituary. I wrote the obituary that I want my wife, each one of my boys, my business partners, my close friends to give, and I have never shared it with any single one of them. But I have shared it with my wingman. And I say, let's say that's you, Tyler. I'll be like, Tyler, I give you permission to hold me accountable to that or ask me about that. Like one of the things in there, because this is not how my wife felt before the accident, is that I want her to say someday at my funeral is that I always felt like the most loved woman in the world, right? That I hung the moon. Because there's days that's not me. I'm just being real. And the other day my buddy calls me up and says, hey, does Donna feel like the most loved woman today? I'm like, dude, why'd you call today? I'm like, all right, how about this? Why don't I promise to get back to you tonight before dinner? Because I realized, you know what? I didn't live up to that today. That is the power, I think, of real. And guess what? In that, and here's something to share maybe, as we're kind of landing the plane a little bit, right? I was given this amazing second chance. Like, I literally should not be here. And also, 2 months ago, I had such severe COVID, they did not expect me to survive. Like, hospitalized, everything, dude. Totally healed today. It's a whole nother story. It'll be in my resilience book. But here's something I realized is, guess what? Every single day before this accident, when I woke up in the morning, was a second chance. But I never understood it. I never realized it. And I want to tell everybody out there listening, guess what? This morning when you woke up, it is your second chance to be the man, the woman, the leader, the husband, the wife, whatever you like is on your heart when you lay up at night and you stare at the ceiling and you're just daydreaming about the potential of what could be, you have the power to take advantage of that second chance tomorrow morning. Even if it's just a small step toward it, you have the power to rewrite your script. And in that, I think, is where I've found the hope to keep moving through some of my darkest days, because I wasn't convinced that maybe tomorrow would be better or maybe next week, but I was kind of confident that next month could be better. And it was honestly, Tyler, it was that allowed, that mindset that allowed me to just keep moving forward into this second chance and see it as a gift and not as a burden or an obligation, as I've talked to other people that have had similar circumstances.
Well, first off, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, it's powerful in so many ways, and it also then, you know, wraps up everything else that we talked about, to me, in a much bigger, more powerful box. And I think that's what's important. So again, thank you for sharing that. I've had a wonderful conversation. I hope our listeners have gotten great value out of it. I know I have. I know I've written quite a few notes to go on top of everything that I've learned, and, you know, prepping for this and reading your book. And I'm excited not only for others to read this book. I think it's great, but as well, I'm excited to read your next book. And I thank you so much for this time today, John. Anything else you want to close with?
Well, thank you for what you're doing, Tyler. You, through our leadership, right, that influence on others, that is, we can make an eternal impact in this world. And that impact that we can have as a single individual is so much greater than I ever understood until I really started working with leaders, whether it's my 17-year-old son or a CEO of a Fortune 50 company. And so I just want to encourage people to figure out what that one thing is. Take a small step, and when you figure out that small step, tell a friend. You just start with those little things, and you'll look back a year from now, and you're going to be like, nice. How's that?
Awesome. Love it. Thank you, John. Appreciate your time, and make sure in our show notes and afterwards everyone gets connected with you, and so appreciate the opportunity to chat today.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. You're awesome, man. Keep rocking.